Hi, this is Micah. I'm the CEO and founder of Amazing Brains Performance Center. You're listening to the Neural Noodle Network podcast.
Welcome to Neuronoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast, featuring our neuropsychologist, Dr. Laura Janssens, Dr. Skip Wren, tech whiz Santiago Brand, and neurofeedback legend Jay Gunkelman. Our goal is to provide information, promote options for better mental health. This is an all-star cast, and I'm more than happy to share their knowledge with you. My name is Pete, and today we have a special guest, Micah Shanser, CEO and founder of Amazing Brains. But before we start, we'd like to thank our Patreon supporters: Outrageous Baking, Tour Talk, Alternative Behavioral Therapy, EEG and Me, Sandhya M, Johnathan, Rowan, January-Turrall, and new supporter Loretta T. Outrageous Baking is a dedicated gluten-free bakery that has been around for 15 years. They're in Colorado, Micah.
Nice.
Just outside Denver. Tour Talk wants more people to discover text-to-speech. And Joshua M., if you're by Washington State, Alternative Behavioral Therapy, Neurofeedback Service, they'd love to put a 19-channel cap on you. Please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. It really helps get the word out. If they can't hear us, we can't help them. Okay, we have on the show Micah Shanser. We came by Micah through Heather Hargraves over at Divergence Neuro. Micah, thanks for coming on the show. How do you know Heather?
Gosh, Heather and I got connected through neuromeditation, if my accurate memory serves me accurately on like my words currently. I'm very interested in flow states and altered states of consciousness. So I think Dr. Terrence's work in neuromeditation is amazing. And I was talking to him a lot about flow and psychedelics, and, Heather and I got connected, and actually just had the pleasure of meeting her up in Toronto about 4 months ago when I went up to meet with, Alex and the rest of the Divergence team.
Yeah. Now, are you affiliated with them now, or what's the relationship there? I was just wondering.
Which Divergence or neuromeditation?
Yeah, Divergence.
Yeah. So Divergence and I have been working on several projects. I think the core of what they're doing for consumers and therapists, or I should say facilitators, is the home training neurofeedback. So we've been working on a white labeled app for our company to roll out home training neurofeedback. We've also been involved in the psychedelic research space. So we've been contracting with Divergence to do program design as well as analysis of EEG. And that's in partnership with a synagogue here in Denver, Colorado, that's doing psilocybin work. And then we're also looking at rolling that out with a couple veterans organizations, and then another organization that's looking at phantom limb pain and psilocybin use. So there's a couple facets to it. And then the thing I'm really, really excited about with their software is the machine learning predictive outcome. So looking at helping them build and also helping us build, how can we look at EEG and then track outcomes? Because I think our field could use a lot more publication. And I think everyone listening to this that runs a clinic has received neurofeedback or neurostimulation type therapies knows how amazing it can be. And I think the more robust that literature can become, and the better we can be at predicting responders versus non-responders, and understanding which protocol to use and when to use that protocol in someone's treatment process, kind of even from a multimodal lens, the better, people's journey of healing can be.
Now, how did you get involved in biofeedback, neurofeedback, psychedelics, and whatnot? Did you take it up in school in psychology, or how did you get introduced?
Sure. So, funny story. My bachelor or my master's degree is in transpersonal psychology, and that's going to kind of encompass those non-ordinary states of consciousness, and also kind of give a different lens than, say, a traditional behavioralist approach. And then I had a specialty in wilderness therapy. So a lot of my career was spent guiding kids in the woods, doing rites of passage work in kind of a traditional sense, and got a degree in transpersonal psychology, wilderness therapy. I was doing a lot of schemo racing at the time, which is really, you wear spandex and run uphill. Don't recommend it to anyone unless you like pain unnecessarily. And my race partner had gone through neurofeedback at Amazing Brains with Dr. Nicole McGuffin. So I actually ended up doing an internship. So Amazing Brains has two branches, a therapy branch and a performance branch. So I founded the performance branch, and post my internship, I actually partnered with Nicole and took over our location in Vail. We've since opened in Frisco, and then she's also opened one in Steamboat. So we have 3 locations in Colorado, and we're looking at opening in Bellingham, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, probably in the next 6 to 12 months.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
Nice.
So that's, a little story about that. And I think for anyone who's in the healing arts, self-help, coaching, performance world, we're all really looking, how can we help somebody? And we all have a little bit of a twist, whether or not you're, a wilderness guide or a neurotherapist or an acupuncturist or a chiropractor. And one of the challenges, and I know this is a criticism from some people of neurotherapy, that it can be expensive and time consuming. From my lens of looking at 12-week programs that cost upwards of $80,000, neurotherapies were incredibly accessible and incredibly impactful without disrupting the family unit. And there's intrinsic value to disrupting the family unit, depending on what your goal is. And there's also value to keeping that family whole. So I really got curious about neuro, and then doing my internship, it just kind of captured my heart. I laughed a lot that I went from working in the woods 9 months out of the year to working in a room staring at a computer. And my father's actually a radiologist. So in a way, reading EEG isn't so dissimilar to his role reading, X-rays or MRIs. But I just really love the idea of looking at somebody, functional neural markers, functional biomarkers, understanding their symptoms, and building out a pathway that gets them long-term lasting results, and also creates agency because they're learning to control their physiology and kind of guiding the process for themselves as well.
What are the symptoms that you're training for? Has it been a little bit different, with COVID, or has it been the same? Like, what are you seeing out there in Colorado?
I mean, I think the same as everyone. I think I think of stress or COVID as just the non-specific amplifier, right? Which is kind of a psychedelic term. So some people that had sleep challenges are having more severe sleep challenges. Some people with anxiety are having more extreme anxiety. And I think it's kind of amplified our society into, I think the word that's got thrown around more recently is that tribalistic standpoint. And then the way that's going to affect everyone is different. One of the things that I've loved about our clinics is we've gotten the opportunity to work with a lot of, the special forces, Olympians, amazing private equity groups. We also work with a lot of just the average local person. And what I found is, at the end of the day, whether or not you're that high performer per se, like the elite level athlete executive, or just the kid trying to make it through school without getting in trouble or melting down, we're really looking at the same foundational questioning of like, are you stuck in a waking state, or are you stuck in a resting state? And then kind of looking at that as this continuum, right? Someone stuck in a resting state when you need to be waking might be like an inattentive ADHD, a brain fog, a depression. Someone stuck in that waking state might be that hyperactivity, anxiety, insomnia. So, we don't specialize as much in the medical model, right? We're definitely our languaging is all performance flow related. Both my wife and I do something called Somatic Experiencing, which is a body-based trauma-oriented therapy, looking at basically reprogramming the nervous system. And from that work, we've really taken that lens of, hey, healing doesn't need to be as this awkward, painful thing that people perceive it to be, right? And I don't want to like pigeonhole any type of modality, but I think there's this stigma towards it. So in the process of working with symptomology, it's really that question of how can we create balance and flexibility for somebody's system, and how can we have that really humanistic approach? And I find that, both the neuro kind of, let's call it EEG, QEEG world, as well as the biofeedback, and then just laying in some more kind of low tech stuff like body scans and breath work, you're able to affect a lot of those main complaints, which might be kind of simplified as, I can't, I'm too anxious, I'm too focused, I'm too burned out, I'm not sleeping well.
Did you say there's a synagogue in Colorado working on psilocybin research?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I heard
so
right, huh?
sacredtribe.org, Rabbi Ben, amazing guy. We've done some really fun events with them. And what I really love is that idea of the gateway to the sacred, but really looking at psychedelic use, not just for the treatment of depression, PTSD, et cetera, which is valid and needed, but really looking at it, what does it do to the heart, to the soul, and to the connection of community? And I think it's permeable across both lines of, treatment of a disorder as well as optimal performance. But it's been really fun to think about stuff from a different lens.
I agree. And it is interesting, fascinating, and kind of ties into maybe some of the more traditional uses for these elements, if we want to call them something, as opposed to maybe the medicinal purposes these days. So,
yeah. And I think, you look at what's happening in Oregon with their decriminalization with Prop 109, and I think there's a lot of different ways to use stuff, right? Like a lot of what's happening in terms of medical research and treatment of disorders, similar to the medical pharmaceutical models. But there's spiritual models, there's community-based models, there's recreation. There's so many different ways in which we can interact. And I think that, the libertarian side of me really enjoys having that sampling and ability to choose how you orient and when you use something. And then there's also the scientific sides of, hey, what are the safety concerns? There's just like the brain and central nervous system in general, there's just so much we don't know, right? That I think it's very important to anyone in the psychedelic realm, but also in the neuroscience realm, that we're doing our best to publish or share our findings so that we can, move forward a whole field and build validation. I mean, I find the work that people are doing with advocating for CPT codes, right? It's so valuable and important, and in a lot of ways really sad that it hasn't happened sooner, and it really builds a stable platform. And we've been really lucky. We've had partnerships with hospitals, insurance companies in our counties that have actually allowed us to bill CPT codes underneath them. So for local people, we can actually provide a lot of our services at no cost. And that's been a just tremendous gift to the community, but also for us to be able to learn how to help people from that model.
For whatever it's worth, I mean, it is what it is, but when you get insurance on board, air quotes, right, it's a game changer, and it allows a lot more people into the venue. One of the things that it still stands out for me when we spoke with Heather was the idea of, I'll say assessment, but kind of pre-screening folks to engage in some of these treatments. And the way that I remembered it is just to make sure their brains are ready to be able to do this type of work. And I know that there's some, I guess you could call it fear, because that's probably what underlies it, but some pushback for these kinds of treatments with, hey, how's it going to, affect people? And are they going to lose their mind? And, traditional psychedelic pushback, negative stereotype type things as far as effects. And again, the idea that she brought up that we're actually doing some screening, my word, to see if folks' brains are ready. And if they're not, guess what? We've got neurofeedback at our ready, and we can train brains to be more available, right? More open to these types of treatments. Pretty cool. Do you work with kind of high performers? Are you working with everybody across the board? I know, Laura, Pete, and I tend to see folks that maybe aren't performing so well, right? And so it's getting folks that are referred for, not being able to do things they want to do or able to focus in school or whatever it might be. But there's also this entirely other different area of treatment, and that's helping folks excel at what they're already good at.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you a kind of a rambly theoretical orientation I have to this, and hopefully that's fun for the listeners. But the answer is yes, it's across the board. One of the things, just based on my personality and where we live up in, Summit County, Colorado, Eagle County, Steamboat, like these are areas where we have a high density of, we have several people on the US ski and snowboard team right now in our offices. We have several people that are, executives of private equity groups. We work with the US Special Forces, we have a lot of in special warfare. So I think we have a lot of these people that are high performers. And one of the things if you're familiar with the work of Flow and kind of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel have really done a great job of kind of tending that fire and rekindling excitement in society. But one of the things to overlay the trauma work that we've done is one of the foundations for anybody to heal and repair is to learn to reorient the nervous system, to start stabilizing it, to create a safe spot in the body. And that can mean a lot of different things, but literally we're looking, when I say that, I mean, is someone able to orient, meaning to notice their body, and does it create stability for them, or is it creating panic for them in a gross oversimplification? And when we started working with the military and some police groups, it's very apparent that it's much scarier for me to be, so the first time I worked with these, we had a couple guys in the basement of Vail Health, which is a hospital here, and Stedman Clinic, Howard Head, if you're familiar, we partnered on this tactical optimization program, and it's 7:30 in the morning. We're in the basement eating breakfast, and I'm like, look, we're shooting. I'm like, what do you want to do? We're going to shoot some guns. We're going to do some brain training, and they're like, yeah, cool. And I'm like, by the way, guys, I'm a therapist. And you watch the room, you go dead silent. You go from being buddies with people to like, oh man. So when I start thinking about creating resilience for people, and I start thinking about rewiring, and healing traumatic brain injury or PTSD or these other things, we can do a lot from the lens of, if we call this optimal performance as baseline, so the best you can do, and you call, say, disorders kind of this other side of challenge. In my estimation, really the same tactics work. And the ability, like biology is scalable, to use kind of one of my favorite quotes from Stephen Kotler. And I really like that idea that when we're working with somebody who's, on the autism spectrum or having sleep challenges, we're really trying to use the same language with them as we would with other people, like say a professional skier. Obviously, we're always humanistically shifting that to meet them, but it helps reduce the stigma. It helps make the process fun. It helps them orient quicker. I find it breaks down the barriers. So when we do our marketing and we use our languaging, we're really hitting that high performance language, but it's really meant to be inclusive of, hey, those ski racers? Well, half of them can't sleep before the race and are throwing up. And the other half are having a hard time staying focused during the race, either coming into it or they're getting distracted on the bottom third. So if you kind of extrapolate that to anxiety or distractibility, it's really the similar challenges that your average worker or person faces: sleep, focus, mood regulation, etc. And I think the ability to look into someone's physiology and help them actually track their physiology, whether it's with a wearable or just by starting to notice and build that kind of interoceptive or in the body awareness, is really valuable. So I hope that answers your question. Wasn't too rambly for you, but that's a little how we think about it. And I think we had a mentor she runs a private equity group. She actually funded our tactical optimization program. And I really never forgot what she said. She's like, hey, doing this for the ultra wealthy and top performers is really cool.
Right.
But if you can't do this for everybody, how much does that matter? Yeah. And I really have taken that to heart of yes, I love being able to serve both populations, the high ticket, white glove treatment, if you will, as well as giving basically the same experience at no cost to people that live near us through our relationships with Vail Health and Peak Health. And we're developing some new ones with UMR and Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I think, the more anyone listening to do this, we just, partnering with local nonprofits and just trying to get it out there for people has been so valuable. We don't really spend any money in marketing because we've just done our best to serve people and treat them as well as we can.
For the record, I'm fine with rambly. Ask Pete.
Cool. There you go, man. So
edit.
Well, and these questions they're simple at face value, right? But when we get into which I understand, part of losing a lot of my staff, and I listen to the podcast as well, is it's hopefully just a different way. Not that our way is the right way or the wrong way. It's just kind of what matches with our personality and the groups of people we work with, but just a different way to approach it, and just a different way to stay curious and, remember that our role is really a supportive role, and that there are so many other, modalities. And I think the precision medical approach to me has been really interesting. I don't think we're there not just within neurotherapy, but just in all of them. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think that our unique field of neuro and biosciences holds a lot of keys that I think a lot of us actually know and that mainstream science hasn't really adopted, partially because I don't have as good of a ways to kind of scale. I'm just like, hey, I notice when I see this person do this thing, like 9 times out of 10, I think 9 times out of 10, maybe it's 10 or maybe it's 7, but it seems like 90% of the time we're having significant improvements within 7 sessions. And when we bring it back to divergence, the big thing I'm really hoping to accomplish with them, for myself and the field and as a whole, is to be able to really quantify that so that data can be used and made public. So if someone else wants to get into the work we're doing or that anyone's doing, we can say, hey, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing that theta to beta ratio, like really classic basic stuff. If we do SMR or versus 13 to 15 up training or 13 to 19 or whatever it might be, what's the difference? Do people get there faster? Are there more ab reactions? What do we see change quantified, like in EEG? It gets me exciting, and it also gets a little overwhelming sometimes when you think about all the factors and being able to do it with an ethical standard.
Just a quick comment, Micah, and it's certainly in response to what you're saying today, but it's from this position, my seat, as a co-host on this show. It's been fantastic, and that's just not a great descriptor, but it's been it's so much more than that. It's been encouraging and exciting to see folks take neurofeedback, if that's the umbrella, and use it in ways and maybe expand it and adapt it in ways that do fit with their maybe outlooks, personalities, theoretical orientations in really cool ways that I never would have thought about it. That's why I didn't, and someone else did. And it in a way seems similar to therapies. And I know when we call ourselves therapists, people, see something and think something and, turn and run. But it is a therapy, and you do have to relate. And it's not just about putting the electrodes in certain spots and turning something on. There's so much more to it than that. And it's about, reading a person in the moment and asking the right questions. How you feeling? How you doing? And having a hell of a lot of know-how on the other end, so you can tailor trainings for this particular individual.
I want to pull on that string a little bit, because I think that's the creativity of what you're alluding to. And I think, like, you think about someone like Seaburn Fisher, who is just amazing, and you're at ISNR and you're listening to people talk. Like, I love Nick and Tiff, like at Neurofield, and Jay's talking to you. I sit in some of these talks and I just have to leave, because I'm just like, all right, I didn't even understand the filler words you're using at this point. That was so complicated. But you need to know that, right? You need to understand the basic neuroscience. You need to understand basic psychology, basic physiology. There's so many fields that goes through. And then you go to Seaburn's talk, and by no means is she light on the scientific knowledge, but
right.
She's sitting there being like, hey, when you put that on someone's head, don't forget that that's a person. Like, you're touching somebody's head right now. And that's shockingly intimate, right? Like, think for the average listener who doesn't do this, when was the last time you touched someone's head who's not your child or your partner? Like, probably been a long time. And I think, to your point of that, it's such a unique dance and balance. And I so love that, because there is a piece in there where, until, it's similar to like the medication theories, right? It's like a lot of people are just taking medication because they think, oh, I'll get rapid change, which is sort of true. Like, you can have a rapid change or a rapid impact from taking a pill, but there's no lasting change. And usually there's an adjunctive therapy, say, Adderall, and behavioral therapy would be a treatment of ADHD, not just Adderall.
Right.
And when we think about what's happening, as I estimate that, you're like, well, we need support for the brain to stabilize and allow for it to stay in a focused state. And then we also need someone to go in and help somebody shift their belief structures, their perspectives. And I think neuro is very similar. I think, and I don't mean to compare it to medication, because I know there's a lot of stigma around that, but I think you can look at it from this lens of that of, well, we can help shift somebody into a focused state, which could allow them to attend to their shadow, attend to their belief, and attend to their work in different ways, but it cannot force them to do that stuff. So there's still that need to walk through somebody mindset work, belief work, healing work, even just functional organization, executive functioning stuff, or our work will also fall flat. They're like, yeah, it's easier to do it, but I still don't do it. You get that kind of a comment, and you're like, yeah, well, cool. Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. Like, I get that you don't want to do this thing because you haven't, internalized a value structure around it, or you have a story saying that you're bad at it, so I really love that for me personally, just an awful lot. And I've been surprised at how little clients, like our staff is really hungry for the science, and our clients are not, right? Like they just want to know, like, hey, is this going to work? Can this hurt me? They're not even that concerned about the latter, which, is still shocking to me. But, they just want to know, will I get better? Right? It's really foundational questions. And it's like, hey, that's a hard thing to answer. And that's a very, unique, that's just one mindset or way to even approach the challenge. Well, what does getting better mean? So it really is a cool gateway to unpack.
Fighting stigmas, we're fighting drug companies, we're fighting laziness. We want people to feel better, right? Whatever it takes. Okay. If you take a pill, it's temporary, right? You do neurofeedback, you're training, it's more than temporary. Or you can do yoga. It's just going to take a long time. I don't even want to get to the drug companies or to the DSM. But unless you got any thoughts on the DSM, Micah, we can fill up the show.
This is what I've come to, and I think that being a moderate in this day and age is a weird place to sit, right?
Yeah.
Just trying to sit and actually attend to what's happening in as beginner's mind as possible. And I mean that in the most political and scientific possible way. So when I think about this, and when I think about where our culture is shifting in terms of like consent and inclusivity and all these other pieces that are really new in their adaptation in like a larger cultural scale, I really think like the informed consent model really makes a lot of sense to me from a true way of like, hey, this is the DSM. It was designed for this to do this. This is medication. It was designed for this to do this. These are the pros. These are the cons. Hey, this is neurotherapy. This is, just kind of allowing for a basic education for the informed consumer. The crux of that statement, as we all like, is that, what is it? TLRTR, like too long to read, whatever I was at with some private equity guys the other night. I'm like, oh man, you should have seen this article. It was great. They got into the nuance and they're like, dude, no one cares. No one wants, like, is there a 30-second video? And I was like, that was the 30-second
slide
video. Yeah, exactly. So I think, it's for all of us to kind of be aware of what our biases are, to notice what our value structures are, and to know like, hey, if we're going to choose to go one route, like that's okay. Or, there's other ways to do it though. And I think to kind of loop way back around to psychedelics, I think that's one of the ways in which distress can really increase for people, right? If you say there's like a slightly disassociative tendency for society, and that is both from like a sympathetic or like high energy, high stress, it's kind of a self-protective measure as I think of it, from self-connection. And then you have, the dorsal kind of shutdown, collapse, disassociation. And I do like to not pathologize those terms, just so you guys know when people are in the office, like, hey, sympathetic is just energy, parasympathetic is calming of energy, like doesn't have to be trauma related. But in this instance, we're using it as a lens of disconnecting from self. And when you remove somebody's ego defenses, and you can do this by dancing or doing art or singing or breathing or psychedelics or nature or eye gazing. I mean, there's 1,001 ways to access these altered intimate states. You're really brought up against by those things in which we have challenging belief works, our shadow work, our laziness, our fears of inadequacy, our, et cetera. And I think that a lot of my hope kind of from the larger scale, not sure how we got on this part of it, but is really that the evolution of the human psyche. Or if you look at, I really enjoyed Spiral Dynamics as like in my early 20s, which looks at theories of human evolution that go beyond, the classic Erickson models, but look at kind of the transpersonal realms, kind of noticing a theme there. But we can actually develop to have a larger sense of self. And I think Star Trek, as dorky as this, in case it wasn't nerdy enough for you, we're going to go to Star Trek. But you think about the prime directive to not, go in and impact a developing society and culture. And I very much see us as humans still in that developing society of culture. We're still warring and fighting over resources. We still have challenges just to see the other as a, as a being. versus just the other. And I think a lot of this, from a physiology standpoint, can help us actually develop, because from a theory of change, if we don't have stabilization, we don't have safety. And I don't mean that in like the modern sense of safety, but we don't have it in the physiological sense of safety. It's very unlikely we'll be able to do that core work or be able to reach and feel supported by someone or be able to support someone else. So I'm optimistic that the type of work we're doing will also have those ripple effects. And I think psychedelics has a unique possibility to do that, but a lot of people are afraid of it. And I think maybe rightfully so for some of them. I think that, there's models that say some people should only do it once in their life, some people should never do it, and some people are able to do it frequently. And they look at that as like evolutionary or genetics, to the shamans being X amount of percent versus people that have ab reactions. Hopefully, I think people listening are like, they're like, this guy's crazy, or at least they understand that, the true hope is for that type of like connection and evolution.
People don't think twice about having a physical trainer. Why are they thinking twice about getting a mental trainer? I don't know if it needs to be marketed differently.
Yeah, I mean, you wound me up today, man. So
let's go.
I got to go to a human performance contract for a week at the UFC, and it was amazing. It was military, professional sports teams, Olympic committees. Their whole, and this isn't around our field. I'm like maybe one of 3 people that does this stuff there. Biofeedback, there was a lot around heart rate variability, and a lot of those people are moving away from it as a performance metric, which makes a lot of sense. But their whole world is KPIs, known performance indicators. And I'm sitting there talking to this guy who's a trainer at a big baseball team, and he's like, so what would be the KPI for you doing this for me? I'm like, well, and it's that rambly, like, well, we can improve sleep by this much. We can, some of the TDCS can do, there's a little more literature on like neuromuscular stuff, but we don't have a great way to quantify the value of it. And I think until we can do that, and therapy runs, it's not unique to our field,
right,
but to make those larger adaptations, hey, if it costs, $0 or $10,000 or $1 million to work with somebody, someone will pay those price tags. It's just, there has to be a known deliverable. And I think that kind of brings it back to the, to the research base and to, publishing and to really tracking the right data, and then also being able to select the right person at the right time. We're working with a car accident through workers' comp right now, and she's doing vestibular therapy. She's doing our therapy. We're trying to get her into hyperbaric because I kind of feel like there's some kind of metabolic energy stuff that needs to be addressed because she's not getting the results that I would anticipate based on having worked with many people with the physical therapists and our, brain therapy and heart rate variability and all these pieces. So it's looking at and being able to say, hey, this person needed something before they worked with us, right? It's like taking that accountability and having that wisdom. Unfortunately, I don't know what that thing is. Like what could increase her ability to increase, say, neuroplasticity to be able to receive the work, and have that adaptation. What's going on in the family unit and the stress and in terms of fueling and hydration, rest and recovery. So I think those are kind of the questions that come up, but I do think that, Ray Dalio has been a great influence in the kind of private equity hedge fund kind of finance world, because he does value neurofeedback in his offices. And, clearly there's a reason for that when someone of that type of logic, goes for it. I just don't think us as a field has been able to do that. A lot of the contracts I've gotten or seen people get is basically personality based. Like, oh, we think this guy's cool. This sounds really interesting. This makes sense. Let's try it.
Therapies tend to not answer those types of questions neatly, right? It's like, hey, how can we get immediate, observable, quantifiable results from this? And it's like I appreciate your question, but it's not a question I can answer like you want me to. Neurofeedback works on brain functioning and timing. It makes the person a better version of their capabilities, right? And so how do you like single that out into, hey, it's going to do this, it's going to do that, it's going to contribute to better sleep, which how long do you have, to tell someone the benefits of sleep when they're looking for, an abstract? And it's hard to translate those things, not to get away from I think the intention of your question, Pete, because everybody should know about this as an option, at least. I think it's something we struggle up against in trying to just do the elevator pitch thing when it doesn't seem like it's built for elevator pitches. And maybe that's just a long-winded therapist, making a case for staying long-winded, but they just don't seem to fit so good. I go to court every once in a while and I'm like, it's not a yes or no answer, right? And then the judge is like, just please answer the question. I'm like, all right, great.
You're like, well, I mean, a captive audience, so I'm going to go for like, but I think, and this is some of the stuff when you look at the business marketing world, and I, by all means, am struggling through this right now for our own business. I think that's looking at what something versus a service provider, and a therapist is inherently trained to not think they can affect change and to understand their limitations and to understand transference and countertransference, right, versus looking at something as a product, right? Like, hey, this is a product, and we are like, and that's one of the things to your earlier question, like we focus on the high performer because we are really good at that, but B, I think it's helpful for the people still in the kind of more DSM categorization side of it to think of themselves as still being a high performer. So we're able to straddle that. But when I talk to someone, I'm speaking as though they're a performer. And when we think about those outcomes, what will you notice different day by day? And what will you notice different in a year from now? I think it's like, hey, by the end of the year, you'll regain sleep. You'll have more stable mood. You'll have more ease of, moving from a focused state to a relaxed state. You'll be able to stay in a focused state longer. I think those are all claims that we could substantiate if we created programs consistently around it. And when people make requests, it's often like, hey, how do I get into like a hyper work mode or flow mode? And I think we equate that to caffeine, which is, I think, a misunderstanding of, human physiology. And we're kind of jacking too far into the sympathetic dominant or kind of high beta stuff versus allowing for some of those gentler flow states, which actually have ways to repeatedly get into them. And that's where you can use something like the McKinsey Institute for 500% boost in creativity and focus. We see significant less burnout, but I don't think we've done a good enough job in my office. I'll just say we have not done a good enough job of putting a wearable on somebody for a year. And we've not done a good enough job of saying like, hey, I asked Dave Seaver this question once and loved his response. I was like, well, what's the longitudinal outcome of like the Mind Alive? Because I like that device.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's cool. It works well. I wish it had a different user interface, but it's great. And then he's like, look, what does the longitudinal outcome matter in this context? If somebody reverts back to their old behavior, it will shift back, right? And I think, and there's other arguments, right? There's other longitudinal arguments we could have. This is just one perspective. But I really like that idea of making depth change that integrates somebody's head, so their thoughts, their beliefs, their mindsets, their heart, so their emotion, their body, their sensations, and their hands, so their actions. So, and I think when we get those trifectas, we can have lasting change that has just truly exponential.
And I'm in agreement for sure. And I'm just goofing with you a little bit, but what would that baseball executive have said if that was your answer? He would that's not what he's looking for. Just kind of back to Pete's question on maybe how do we get some answers to promote this. But I think your answer is accurate.
I think with that, in that instance, it's having the comfort to approach it as a B2B dialogue. Hey, what are you guys struggling with? Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of people with impulse control issues because we have a lot of, think about ADHD and oppositional defiance as a high performing subset. Disproportionate in executives and athletes. Oh, cool. So you're having issues with people, with risk management, or the very thing that made that person an amazing athlete is the very reason they just wrapped their car around a tree. Oh, cool. Well, let's help. And to your point, that's a hard thing to quantify, and any therapist knows that you're like, yeah, I have a toolkit to work with that, but that person's not willing to work. But I think there are ways in which we can approach it better and really honing in. And I think also helping, a lot of people are using Whoop and Oura Ring in the performance worlds now, or different versions of that. So I think honing in on the recovery metric, I think that's already happened in the performance world. You look at some of the bases and these guys are drinking less because their recovery score on the Whoop sucks, right? So it's like, it's really interesting, but that's a secondary benefit that I don't think anyone would have predicted. It's no longer like, I can do more push-ups than you. It's like, I can do more push-ups than you, and I'm going to recover better. And I slept one more hour than you. It's like, how did that become a competition? And how can we, but to your point, like, I do not have all the answers, but hopefully people listening to this can kind of approach dialogues with municipalities and teams and businesses with these lenses of what's the value, and I hate to say this, but it really is how it works. What's the value of doing something as an intervention to stabilize something like sleep, which I think we're all fairly good at? I mean, that's very quantifiable because there's a ton of data on burnout and injury and cognitive decline with that, and even, neurodegeneration. So it's a fairly easy thing to make that leap. It's just having the confidence in our data and the reliability of our intervention. Like, hey, 80% of the time we're going to be able to increase sleep by, 1.5 hours for this type of person. But that's, do you guys feel comfortable doing that with your clientele? I'm personally not quite there, but I hope to be there soon.
My interactions with my clients are so individualized that we can talk about most things. I try to cite as much literature as I can. As you mentioned, they don't always want to know how it works and why. They're trusting a clinician, and so they're in, if you know what I'm saying. And so there's that aspect of it that I think just facilitates whatever seems best practices.
The nice thing about high performers is they're not lazy because you're training. I mean, it's work. You're putting your brain to work, and see, some people just say, you know what, give me the pill. Okay, whatever. I'll just, get on that program. But there is, work involved. The PE guys, they flip to the last slide. Okay. They don't want to see the pain. They just want to see the baby. Okay. Well, there's work involved, I'm curious, what would you do with it? Not knowing anything, what would you do with the Antonio Brown situation? Supposedly the Buccaneers offered him $200,000 to go get checked out. And that's not helping the stigma at all. Cause I think he said they offered him $200,000 to go to the crazy house. You have any thoughts on that situation, how you deal with it? If Antonio's listening to us right now?
What up, Antonio? I do not watch pro sports, and I do not watch the news. So I actually know
good answer.
Basically nothing about what you're talking about, which is maybe embarrassing, but I'm pretty sure he's a football player. From what I've gathered, there was a concussion, and then his behavior had shifted significantly, like out of character. So is that a fair synopsis?
That is a fair.
Cool. From anyone who does EEG on this phone call is like, yep, like that makes 120% sense, right? You're like, that happens to people. I was at a TBI conference last year, and I was like, has anyone ever seen someone's behavior become more pleasant post TBI? And someone raised their hand. They're like, yes, actually, this one guy's wife was like, he's finally nice, and it was great. But it's
he's not talking.
But that's But I think that I don't fully understand brain injury. I think that is a frontier of neuroscience.
Yep.
And I think, we're actually working with a kid right now that had a concussion in the X Games. And I think it makes sense. It's really sad. And you think about trauma as being, and I'm going to step into the emotional side of trauma, not just the physical trauma, but you think about that being isolation. Like you think about the Vietnam era of people being isolated post-war, like these kids that came back and the pain that caused. And you think about this person who's acting in a way, and this is knowing very little about the situation, so I don't want to step into a hornet's nest too much, but you think just from a standpoint of someone had a brain injury, they did something bad, it sounds like, well, yeah. So then how can we meet that person and actually rehab and repair? And this is like basic couples therapy. This is basic life. Like, how do you regulate and repair? This is family systems, and so I think it makes sense. Like if someone's like, hey, here's $200,000, go get yourself checked out, you've got issues. You're like, that feels crummy. But if you're like, hey man, like you're clearly a different person, something happened, like let's help you through this. And we know that, say, the cortical slowing, just in a vague sense, from a brain injury can have those impacts on mood, on frustration, on sleep, on attention, on performance. It makes a ton of sense. And then you have somebody who's, a top 0.1% of performer who's geared towards action. That inaction is going to be equated with the end of the world. So, I hope that, if he is listening, you're just like, man, not knowing really anything about you, I feel like a little bit hope to get what you're going through. And I hope that you get not just kind of medical, say, reparative support for your brain, but also like that heart connected sense of like, dude, that sucks. Like, you probably just want to feel like yourself again. And there are people out there that can help you through that process. There are interventions out there that can help assess for that. And it's really nice when we have pre and post maps for injuries and we can understand and quantify stuff better. But, like, come on out to Vail, man. Like, we'll take care of you. And, we do our best to treat everyone the same. Like, it doesn't matter if you're, the quote unquote coolest NFL player in the world, or just like the local kid struggling with ADHD, like, you're still a human. And I hope that people can see that, because the media stuff, part of the reason I don't get involved is that it gets so spun so quickly that I find it brings me into a more tribalistic standpoint, and that's not where I operate my best. That's where I start getting
right. Well, nobody wants to take ownership of it, because if the NFL says, "Oh, there's another TBI out there," that doesn't help their business, and then
their branding has gone downhill for a while on stuff. From what I've kind of understood, like, I think it's like, just own it. I've never understood. I used to live with a coach of the United Healthcare team for cycling. And I was like, just let the guys go. Like, just, go for, like, I'm on that side of things, but it's just like, hey, like, let's just call it what it is. Like, people have a high amount of, like, CTE is a real thing. Like, concussions are a real thing. Like, these aren't speculations from some whistleblower. So just own it. Like, just spend money. You have plenty of money. Spend money on people like us that have amazing things. Do the research, do the long-term outcome. Like, that's the amazing thing with the military, is that the VA has the ability and desire to be supportive. It's the best, as far as I can tell. It's not great, but it's still the best example of socialized medicine we have. It's the biggest group branch of that. Like, and these are people that have had multiple injuries as well. Anyway,
I think the easiest way you could have gotten out of it, Mike, is just say, hey, you know what? They didn't get a baseline. I got nothing to compare it to. No comment. Everybody should have a baseline.
It's true, but also we can, that's the interesting thing about looking at, raw data and morphology versus kind of topo maps of microvolts versus standard deviations and ERP. There's so many ways that we can look at associative markers. So while I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, like, hey, this is your concussion, we could say, hey, we see this delay, or your ERP's over here. We see, your theta and delta is like way up here. We, and we could say, like, I don't know what you looked like before, but pretty sure that someone like that has a pretty darn fast physical and brain response time, and we know that when someone's injured, we see that slow down. So I think we get in trouble as a field sometimes when we overstep our, like, our power of suggestion and, like, our ability to see everything. And maybe someone like Jay can do that way better than I can, but that's where I like to use a lot of the terms of, like, associated, or I'm really curious. Sometimes we see this with some people, but by the way, it can also present with these other things, like what feels true for you.
Just to your point of, just to, again, take Antonio Brown, because he's who we're talking about. Someone in his world being able to have the type of conversation that you're scripting somewhat is valuable. And there's a sports neuropsychology society. I'm a neuropsychologist, Laura is too. So that's kind of how we're in this world, but they're getting psychologists working with teams more and more and more when they have the sports neuropsych conferences. Interestingly, it's older folks that started it, and then a bunch of new folks, young folks in there, all well-dressed and good looking, And so it's cool, because it seems like this interest in sport and in neuropsych and brain function and concussion impact is being addressed, with folks being then integrated into the treatment teams of professional teams, right? So you have to see the medical doctor, then you have to go see the brain doctor, as you're kind of alluding to, Pete. And if you're going to train, your body physically, what are you doing about upstairs? That's the big deal. If it controls 95% of our functioning is unconscious, let's get after, the main hardware for that, right? And so anyway, so it's happening, and it is encouraging, and as folks are more and more involved with just these athletes and performers, I think those kinds of conversations will happen. I'm hoping, at least that's my excitement around it.
Heck yeah. And I think hearing that, I'm like, my message to that people as it is to myself, it's like, hey, awesome, do the best job you can, and like track your outcomes the best you can. Like, just gather any bit of information. We live in this cloud-based digital age of machine learning and AI and large data sets. And I'm, being able to prove that out with that community because to your point, that community is coachable, which is really nice, right? They do follow through on their exercises mostly. Like that is just a beautiful opportunity to pave the way for other teams, to pave the way for the general population, to pave the ways for the high performers, like really kind of hopefully building it out so that rising tide raises all ships. And I think the more we can think about that of like open sourcing what we know and sharing it with people. We have someone just contact me. They're like, we're opening a neuro office 4 doors down from me. I was like, sweet. She's like, really? I'm like, yeah, dude, come in. They're going to do lens stuff. And I was like, yeah, come in. I'll brain map you. I'll walk you through everything we do. She's like much newer in the field. I was like, I'll mentor you. Like, she's like, what do you mean? I was like, look, man, like I'm the only game in town. People don't know what an EEG is. Like you go scream it from the rooftops. Like some people are going to like me better. Some people are going to like you better. Like good on
whatever.
You. And I think the faster we can get there and the faster we can have like meaningful dialogue, the better. I mean, I think I just want to thank you all. When I came across your podcast, it was just so exciting to me to see that there's a platform out there having, the episodes I've listened to of you all have been really diverse. And I think there's getting information out there, breaking down the barriers is beyond valuable. So I'm just so excited. And it's an honor to be on here with you guys.
Well, so Micah, thank you so much. What's the best way that people can find out more about you and your biz?
Amazingbrains.com is the easiest. That'll kind of drop you in. We are building out a YouTube channel right now, so we'll have more content on there. We're on all the social media. Amazing Brains Performance Center, I think is what we are. I'm not a social media guy either.
I hear you.
So, but that we can link that in the show notes. And if anyone's interested and just agrees with what I said or disagreed with what I said, like reach out. I'm really happy to chat. I really do want to be part of the community and help us develop. And I know I have a lot to learn.
Very few experts in this field. Just ask Jay.
Yeah.
Right, Jay?
Yeah, he's definitely an expert. So.
Well, we thank you all for listening to NeuroNoodles Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast. Hey, we'd like to thank our Patreon business supporters, Outrageous Baking. They're a dedicated gluten-free bakery that has been around for 15 years. Check them out at outrageousbaking.com. TOR wants more people to discover text-to-speech at tortalk.se. And if you're in Washington State, Alternative Behavioral Therapy Neurofeedback Service in Vancouver, ask for Joshua M. We'd also like to thank our supporters, EEG and me, Sandhya M, Johnathan, Rowan, January-Turrall. And we'd like to welcome our new supporter, Loretta T. Hey, do you have an idea for a topic or guest? Please email pete@neuronoodle.com or leave us a voicemail in the show notes. Please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And hey, if you really, really like us, you can always buy us a coffee on Patreon/NeuroNoodle. We love our Patreon peeps. Cue the music.